Hello everyone and welcome to Killershrewfan's 12 Days of Reviews. When it comes to the beasts of the Mesozoic line, I'm a huge fan of what David Silva has done with his articulated dinosaur figures. Although you'd never be able to tell by looking at my channel, they are criminally under-reviewed here. I think I have a majority of both the raptor and ceratopsian figures at this point, but I've only reviewed like 2. Oh gosh, I'm the worst. That being said, I was hoping to be a bit more on top of the upcoming Tyrannosaur line, and I was desperately hoping I'd be able to feature one as part of my 12 days of reviews here. After all, this series is both about playing catch-up while also celebrating the figures I'm yet to give proper attention to on the channel. And if there's something worth celebrating this year, it's those Tyrannosaurs. But unfortunately, it's looking like the first of those figures might not even arrive by the end of the year, so we'll have to make do with something else. I mean, that's fine. It's not like I don't have dozens of other outstanding models to choose from, and with all that in mind, I decided today I would take a look at this, the Fan's Choice Medusaceratops repaint. This figure just came in stock recently and is the first Fan Choice Ceratopsian repaint available, making it the perfect subject for a year-in review. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Fan's Choice line, David puts out polls with proposed repaints for his dinosaurs, and the ones with the most votes end up getting produced. The winners for the Ceratopsian line were a Torosaurus and Pachyrhinosaurus repaint in the style of the Walking with Dinosaur designs, as well as a Styracosaurus in the style of Dead Sound's Old Buck from the amazing animated Dinosauria series. And that one was so popular that it actually earned a total retool of the head and 2 variants. And then of course, this Medusaceratops with the colors of an iridescent rainbow snake. And whereas this figure wasn't one of my personal choices, I was lucky enough to see my top 3 get the treatment. But since it looks like I'll have to wait a little longer for those other ones, I figured we'd take a look at this Medusaceratops and see if the Fan's Choice variant is the way to go. So here we go, it's Killershrewfan's 12 Days of Reviews, and this is the Beasts of the Mesozoic Fan Choice Medusaceratops. So first, a quick overview of the packaging. It's the typical Beasts of the Mesozoic box with the see-through window giving you a look at the figure within. A sleeve on the side features some beautiful paleo art by Raf Lomaton, I hope I'm saying that right, as well as the title of the line and species indicator. The back of the sleeve is then covered in facts about the animal and promises a collector's card inside. While we're on the back, you've got a catalog of the other Fan's Choice repaints that are on their way, the mentioned Torosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, and Old Buck. Then the top has all of the pertinent information about what's included, and the side features the logo once again, as well as the Triceratops emblem, a fitting figurehead for this line. But enough about the packaging, let's get this Medusaceratops out and on display. And there is the Medusaceratops in all of its glory, and I gotta say, under all these lights, that paint job is quite fascinating to look at. I never would have thought that metallic paints on a dinosaur model would look convincing, but in this context, it works perfectly to replicate the subtle sheen of snake scales. This is trivial, but I will say that it's pretty fitting for a dinosaur named Medusaceratops to get a paint job based on a snake. I think the original was based on some lizard or other. But going in for a closer look, you can see that the face is covered in a mosaic of varied, non-overlapping scales that grow in size across the face and reach their largest on and around the frill, as well as beneath the jugal there. The outward flaring horns and slight nasal ridge of the animal have been captured, along with those distinct epiparietals that give the animal its name. All of these features, as well as the beak, have then been covered in a subtle keratinous texture. Moving down the body, you can see the scale detail continues onto the neck, clustering closer in the areas of sagging skin. Once you hit the body, the scale details are joined by randomly dispersed, raised scales that dot the torso, haunches, and limbs of the figure. You have also got a line of raised scales running down the back of the animal, but once you hit the tail, you can see it separates into 2 rows of raised scales. The limbs of the figure feature the general muscle tones you'd expect to see, although a little less pronounced to give them a more neutral appearance. You have also got some nice wrinkles around the elbows and knees, and the scale detail is quite crisp and well handled as you feed down into those ceratopsian-style feetsies. Looking at the underside of the figure gives you a great sense of the animal's girth, and the pectorals and folds of gathering skin have been adorned in more scales. As far as the soft tissue goes, there isn't a ton to talk about here since it's up to you to decide the pose of the animal, and as such, having a bunch of baked-in tension lines or areas of buckling skin really wouldn't add to the figure and may even work against the pose you're going for. Still, there are some areas of sagging flesh and folding skin, most notably hanging down from the throat and curling against the limbs. The weight of the animal is also emphasized through areas of sagging skin that surround the gut. It's not much, but enough to keep the detail from being just about the scales. And that's the sculpt of this thing. But then we come to the real showstopper of the piece, that being, of course, the paint job. There is an absolute ton of color on this figure, with different shades of purples and blues transitioning seamlessly between each other, both above and beneath the black flank and peach and mint markings of the midsection and neck. All of this is set against a cream underbelly with a brown wash, giving the design a great contrast of colors. And the face is amazing. I love the striping across the snout and mandible, and again, the transition between the metallic cool tones of the face are gorgeously handled. Another great aspect of this piece would be the unique markings. You can see you've got some eye spots resting in the fenestra there, but the really cool features are the uneven stripes of brown applied across the brow horns and those first epiparietals. I've always loved the idea of markings on ceratopsian horns, and even though we got that on the previous Medusaceratops, this just looks so much better. The unevenness of the stripes and dark washes give it a much more believable appearance, as if it formed with the growing keratin rather than being just painted on top of it. And that's the broad strokes of the paint job. Overall, I think it's safe to say that this is among the most involved color schemes we've gotten from the entire line, and one of the best done in my book. I think it perfectly walks the line between the flashier decos that are synonymous with the beasts of the Mesozoic lines, while also coming across as believable and grounded. And I think a lot of that is due to how well it captures the spirit of its real-world inspiration. That subtle sheen across the scales really ties it all together for me. As far as the articulation goes, this figure boasts 20 points, and it's basically the same we see with the rest of the line. The mouth can be opened and closed as such. The base of the skull can be rotated around like so. The neck can crane up and down, as well as having a slight left-right turn and rotation. The arms can be rotated at the shoulders, then you have got the elbow joint and wrist articulation. The hind limbs are more or less the same, with the forward rotation at the hips, bending at the knees, ankle flexing, and a slight rotation point at the feet. And the tail can be rotated about on a ball and socket joint. You also get the ab crunch, as well as a limited side-to-side turning and rotation point at the midsection. And finally, it might be hard to see on camera, but set back in the deep mouth is a tongue between the rows of teeth, and that can also be posed. If you ask me, that's a little pointless. You'd have to have a very specific pose going on to even be able to notice that one, but regardless, all the other points of articulation allow you to get this figure into some great poses, ranging from tranquil, curious, and calm, to active, and even aggressive. And that's about all there is to the sculpt, paint, and articulation of this figure. As far as the size goes, in a fairly neutral position, it measures just over 12 inches long, or 30.5 centimeters, while at its highest point, about 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters tall. Bear in mind that both of these measurements are subject to the pose you put this figure in, but a baseline length of 12 inches would put this figure in at around 1/20 scale for an estimated 20-foot long animal. So a little small for the advertised 1/18 scale. For size comparisons, I don't actually have any other Medusaceratops figures in my collection. Weird. So we'll just jump right into the fellow beasts of the Mesozoic comparisons. First up, here it is with Big Boss, the Pachyrhinosaurus, which I reviewed during last year's 12 days of reviews, and this is still one of my favorites from the line. I'm keen to get my hands on the Fan's Choice variant, but for now, you can see how these two size up to each other. Next up, here it is with the one who started it all, the beautiful Zuniceratops. This was my first from the line, and it was all a downward spiral from there. I couldn't ignore the rest after how much I loved that one. And here's a fun little comparison, emphasis on little. Here's the Fan's Choice Medusaceratops next to the newly released 1/18 scale Protoceratops, to give you an idea of how that little guy would have sized up next to these larger ceratopsians. And I love that we finally have a Protoceratops in scale with all the rest. And then at the opposite end of the size spectrum, here it is with the largest from the line, the 1/18 scale Triceratops, to give you a rough idea of how Medusaceratops scaled up to the most famous horned dinosaur of all time. And finally, this is less of a size comparison and more of a paint comparison. Here it is with the original Medusaceratops. And whereas that paint job was never one of my favorites, it still had a lot of appeal. I loved the mix of yellows and purples. The blue markings on the face were a nice splash of color, and the markings on the horn, though a little basic, were still nice, seeing as they were one of few figures to actually include patterning on the ornamentation. But I will admit, next to the Fan's Choice iteration, it does look pretty basic in comparison, especially the treatment of the horns. Those gray bands don't really hold a match to the brown striping here. Overall, I can still appreciate the original for its palette, but if you could only get one, I think I would recommend the Fan's Choice color scheme. And that was the Beasts of the Mesozoic Ceratopsian Fan Choice Medusaceratops repaint. As always, the straightforward but accurate sculpt and great articulation are reason enough to celebrate this figure. But I find this one to be particularly noteworthy given the bold and intricate color scheme. I still doubt it will turn out to be my favorite of the 4 upcoming repaints, but I can say with 100% honesty that I'm happy with how this one turned out, despite it not being one of my personal first choices. If you're yet to get a Medusaceratops from David Silva, then I think this should probably be the one you pick. But as always, I want to know what you guys think of this figure. Do you own it yet? Are you planning to pick it up? Which version of the Medusaceratops do you prefer? What Fan's Choice repaint are you most looking forward to? And what would you have liked to see done instead? Leave all of your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thank you all so much for tuning in to today's review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow for a trip to the Namek Formation. Until then, take care out there, and bye-bye.